I guess we are gonna get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you for being here with us as well. Today, we are excited to partner with the Barnstable Land Trust to bring you local author Christie Palmer Lowrance, author of Nature's Ambassador, The Legacy of Thornton W. Burgess, and her most recently published book, The Last Heath Hen. Christie Palmer Lowrance has passionately pursued her writing career as a journalist, freelance and travel writer, biographer, editor, consultant, and writing instructor. Her work covers diverse subjects that include the history, art, literature, and commercial life of Cape Cod. She has taught writing at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and Cape Cod Community College. Without further ado, Christie Palmer Lowrance.
Thank you so much, Amy. And all systems go here? I'm a non-tech person. I hope this is okay. But this is extremely special today. Thank you all for coming. This is National Book Month, and to be able to give a talk about Thornton Burgess at National Book Month and be part of that celebration it's extremely special, because this man in mid 20th century had probably sold 7 to 10 million children's books. And what's deeply impressive about Thornton Burgess as a writer is that half of his books are still in print. And the first one, Old Mother West Wind, was first published in 1910. And any of you who know the book-selling market will know that's unbelievable. Books do not last. I've heard booksellers say 5 years, and that's it. So it's an extraordinary story, and I'm really genuinely delighted that you're all here to share it. Here's a list of some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. You've had a chance to look over those. This is an important quote. In the realm of wildlife conservation and natural history education, there's one name in the United States that must not be forgotten: Thornton W. Burgess. And the reason is he was an active early proponent of the necessity of public awareness of conservation of our wildlife and the environment. I keep this up, and I keep it in the front of my mind because it speaks to the importance of this man that I wrote a biography on, that he's being said of this prestigious individual, this name must not be forgotten because of his contributions to nature and the environment. And right now, is there anything more timely? I mean, we're also critically aware of the environment and the stresses that are on it. So here was a person who was laying a groundwork for the concern, and I'll get into that a little bit, but I wanted to share that quote with you. And here's another one that's important to me. Any of you who are writers know that the title of anything, a book or an article, is important. And so deciding what the title of my biography for Thornton Burgess was going to be, I thought, it'll come to me. I'll figure it out when the time comes. So I was reading this old yellowed paper, 1935. It was an essay that he'd written. And I'm reading along, and I come upon, I would rather write for and talk to children than be a best-selling novelist. And I would rather be Mother Nature's ambassador to the kingdom. Stop right there. I knew I had the title for my book, which is Nature's Ambassador. And indeed, Thornton Burgess was exactly that. So the early part of this talk is going to be to lay the groundwork. If this man is so important, so prestigious, how did he get there? How did that happen? Don't we all kind of want to know what created someone's legacy? So this is the second house there on the right, the one with the porch. That's Thornton Burgess's birthplace. It also happens to be my house. I live there and have lived there for 40 years. which is very cool. And if you're wondering, no ghosts. He has not whispered. But School Street in Sandwich doesn't look remarkably different today. You know, these old Cape villages, you know, so the character is still there. But it's important to see this was a village. He was born here in that house. His father died when he was 11 months old of tuberculosis, and his mother had to move. Both Thornton Burgess's father and mother had lots of family in the village. And so his mother, Caroline, had no money. She had no resources except family. And in family, she was rich. And so the houses, here's a picture of Caroline in her later years. But so they moved, Thornton Burgess and his mother in his childhood, to 10 different houses in Sandwich. And I'd always known that. I'd written about Thornton Burgess before I moved into the house. But when you're writing about somebody and you're thinking, oh, I have 2 sons. Moving to 10 houses in your childhood and never having your own space. What would that be like? And I'd been working on the biography, which took 4.5 years, a while before I understood, you know, the perspective that Thornton Burgess gained as a boy, having to move because he and his mother, you could say they were impoverished, except they always had a place to live and they had something to eat. But the strength that they drew on was the family. And that's the point. And I think this is important for youngsters today to understand too. Look to where your resources are. And a lot of times it's the people around you, it's your family. And he certainly, he drew on that. But he also had the opportunity to understand, bear with me if this sounds strange, to think like the wildlife characters he was going to write about. Because the Peter Rabbit and Sammy Jay and Reddy Fox, all the wild creatures that you've ever seen have to be supremely aware all day long. They have to be wary of what's above, what's below, what's around. They have to be on guard for someone who will be after them. They're looking for food, they're looking for shelter. And Thornton Burgess didn't have to be that kind of wary, but he never in his childhood knew that the space that he was in was guaranteed to be his. You understand? It was borrowed space. And it occurred to me when I'd been working on his biography that he had a richer understanding, I think, of the animal stories that he was creating because of his experience as a boy. So he grew up in Sandwich, and a lot of his time was spent trying to help his mother earn money. He was picking blueberries and shoveling snow. He was herding cows on Town Neck, if you know Sandwich at all. So the outdoors was what he knew. He was extremely comfortable and knowledgeable about the outdoors. And as he was in the outdoors, he was watching, you know, how the birds were interacting. If crows are cawing, how come? You know, what are they making the fuss about? So he acquired knowledge as a boy. It began his education as a children's writer in nature began as a boy. And I have the picture of the boardwalk there. If you know Sandwich, you're probably familiar with that boardwalk. But he had a very rare experience with nature, which it's fun to talk about this. Because he describes in his autobiography at the age of 5, he was crossing this very boardwalk with an adult and his cousin. And when they're making their way out to the sand dune at the far end of the boardwalk there, they're going to see something that none of us, I don't believe, have ever seen. Raise your hand if you have. But he gets out there, and on the beach in front of him, the Sandwich Beach, is a 74-foot blue whale. So there were harpooners at Provincetown in Cape Cod Bay who had harpooned. This is back in the day. Thornton Burgess was born 1874. So this was 1879 that this happened. And they had harpooned the whale. It had escaped, but died and washed up on the Sandwich Beach, 74 feet. I mean, that's very long. And so the marvel of nature, it's why I have this here, the marvels of nature, how you never know what you're going to see in nature. You never know. So keep your eyes open. This was another part of the environment that raised him. If you know the village, you see the town hall there, that big building, the churches, those are the glass factories, steep stacks there in the background in Cape Cod Bay. So it was a village that he grew up in. It wasn't a city. And nevertheless, he had educational aspirations. He would have loved to have gone on to college, and there was absolutely no money. The only money available to him was a grandfather who said he'd give him a year as a bookkeeper. Well, Thornton Burgess was a realist. He said, if that's all I've got, I'll take it. So he went to bookkeeping school, loathed it. I hope there are no bookkeepers here, but it was not his forte, but he accepted it. And ultimately that move from Sandwich to Boston was the beginning of a life he had no image of when he was a boy. So this is a trajectory, and I make this point here, the constants in his life: nature, children, and writing. How many of us can look at our lives that simply and say, these are the things that were supremely important? So he was on the Cape, he went to Boston, he went to Springfield, and at the latter part of his life, he was in Hamden, Mass. So I'll talk a little bit about those places, but it's interesting to know, and I'm sorry the top part is taken off there, but he was a journalist when he began writing for children. He had absolutely no intention of being a great internationally famous children's author, none whatsoever. And it was, as I say later on, circumstances that forced that. He had two marriages. The young woman on the left is Nina, who died in childbirth, a tragedy when you consider that Thornton Burgess had lost his father before he was a year old, and his son also never met a parent. And the woman on the right is Fanny, his second wife. Both of these women were important, extremely important in quite different ways. So I'm sorry, that's up a little too high there. But desperation, not aspiration, was what really inspired his career. And that's because the second wife, Fanny, he had married her. He had recovered from the supreme tragedy of losing this beautiful young woman that he loved so dearly. He had recovered from that, and he'd met a woman, married. She had two teenagers, and he felt confident this was a good move for him. So he married her. 2 months later, he walks into his job, Phelps Publishing in Springfield. He worked there 15 years. He was an editor for Good Housekeeping. He was highly successful. He walks into his office. On his desk is a piece of paper, and it says, "Your services are no longer needed. You have 2 weeks." He was laid off with 2 weeks' notice. He had just remarried to a woman with 2 kids. He had a 3-year-old and his mother to support and himself. So 6 people to support, and suddenly no income. And I think it's important to tell this story to understand, can you think of anybody you've known who's been slammed by life like that? And he had to rally. He had no choice. And what he did, he began writing. So Old Mother West Wind, and there's a copy, 1924 copy up here, if you want to look at it more closely. But he had come out with this book the year before. It was kind of fun. It was a lark. The next year, when he's desperate, this book takes on new meaning for him. And it had some success. It was a source of income, and he began writing children's books. So when I say desperation, not aspiration, it's interesting, isn't it? How life does that. And maybe you can think in your own lives of a circumstance was so unwelcome. At the same time, it directed you in a good way. That's what happened to Thornton Burgess. Another thing he did at the same time was begin writing a syndicated daily story and scared the heck out of himself when he signed the contract. If any of you are writers, to write 800 words a day for publication, 6 days a week, sometimes 7, is terrifying, I can assure you. And he contracted this again out of desperation. He felt he had no choice except to rise to the occasion. So he began writing these daily newspaper articles. And what's interesting, what he undertook out of fear and desperation and no confidence he could do it, that really enabled the name of Thornton Burgess to go worldwide. I know someone who learned of his death in South Africa. He was wildly popular in Japan. I'll get to that in a moment. His name was known literally around the world and throughout the country, and he was hugely popular in Canada as well. And the fact that he was in newspapers with these columns and these stories was a big piece of that. So again, the misfortune and his response to it shaped him. So his influence on literature, conservation, environmental education, this guy is important in all 3 of these arenas. So you're looking at a quote here as the author of 27 books. William Hornaday was a hugely influential conservationist. And in 1919, he gave Thornton Burgess a gold medal award. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But he credited him with this audience of millions of boys and girls. And I thought, how can that be? Millions, really? Millions? He had only started writing in 2010, his first children's book. And the more I delved into Thornton Burgess, I came to understand, yeah, it was, his influence was that great. But Thornton Burgess was onto something, and it's relevant. And it's why I really love having a chance to talk to folks like you about who and what he was. Because he was writing children's books, but unlike a lot of other children's authors, he wasn't writing to make $1 million, and he wasn't writing to be famous. There was a belief behind his children's books, and that was education, that children could learn and they could understand. And this is what he says: I was in possession of a master key to education through nature. And so it was so interesting to see that was his point. So we all know and love Beatrix Potter. And there's her Peter Rabbit, and there's Thornton Burgess's Peter Rabbit. And any of you who've come in here thinking, now wait, how did this happen? I had to deal with that too, as his biographer. Was this plagiarism? How did this happen? And I came to understand Thornton Burgess's Peter Rabbit was self-published in 1901. And it came to the US, and Thornton Burgess read her book to his boy. So Thornton Burgess was perfectly familiar with her book and perfectly familiar with the fact she'd written it. But when he began writing children's stories, his son would not let any rabbit be named anything other than Peter. It had to be Peter Rabbit. That was the power of Beatrix Potter's story. And so Thornton Burgess could name Reddy Fox and Bobby Coon and all the other creatures, Chatterer the squirrel. But the rabbit had to be Peter Rabbit, and so it stayed. And he tried changing it, but everyone was unhappy, including his publisher. So he's all right, we'll leave it at Peter Rabbit. And I ask authorities if this is of interest to you. Was it plagiarism? What do you think? And one said today it would be. It would be considered plagiarism that he used that name. The other person took a more historical view and said, and I think they would both agree, in that day, this was the dawn of children's literature. This was the early 1900s. At that time, children's literature was just emerging. So it was a different climate then. And the rules were somewhat different. So this is, I'll move over this quickly, but I absolutely love this quote. This woman, Anne Carroll Moore, was a librarian. And I always had, in everything I read, the impression she did not like Thornton Burgess. He was not Beatrix Potter. He was not literary enough quite to suit her, this New York public librarian. And so she had this boy in her office and said, so what are your favorite books? What do you love? And here's her office all filled with books. And he said, well, do you have anything here by Thornton Burgess? And I can just imagine this librarian going, Thornton Burgess, really? And the boy says, yes, he can put it over all the others because he sees what I see and I understand his language. So, any of you who've dealt with children and books, this is the key to success. The children can get it, they can comprehend it. The writer is not speaking above or below. And that was Thornton Burgess's gift. So I love that. And another key to his success as a writer of 70 children's books was look at the types of animals he was writing about. This wasn't one kind or one species. This wasn't just squirrels, not just muskrats, not just frogs or toads. It was amphibians and reptiles and arachnids and birds and mammals. And look at the habitats. And Thornton Burgess, again, acquired, here on the Cape, he acquired his familiarity with the diversity that enabled him to write like that. So the global audience and 3 books translated into Braille. I spoke with somebody at Perkins School for the Blind, and they said in the 1920s, in those early years, there were very few books in Braille for children. Thornton Burgess had 3 in Braille, which makes me, it speaks to the breadth of his audience and I think his importance. But in Japan, he became hugely successful. I'm sorry that's cut off up there, I apologize. But he had a 1973 anime program that was on television 1 day a week. The organist at St. John's Church in Sandwich is Japanese. She lived in Tokyo. She watched those programs based on Thornton Burgess characters. And she said, oh, we were riveted. It was de rigueur. Everyone had to watch, every child had to watch that program based on the 20 books that had been translated into Japanese. So the Japanese children were going to bed at night hearing Thornton Burgess stories. It's really quite remarkable. So this is the man, William Hornaday, I mentioned to you, had honored Thornton Burgess. And he's the one who said, you've influenced millions of children. And you see the book title there, The Adventures of Poor Mrs. Quack, 1918. The reason this man, this fire-breathing conservationist, was so grateful to Thornton Burgess was he wanted to get the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So you've heard of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We all have, because it's still influential today. And he was having a terrible time getting it passed through Congress. Thornton Burgess had, as a conservationist himself, said, how can I help you? And William Hornaday said, would you write a book, a children's book describing the plight of the migrating bird? And Thornton Burgess said, absolutely, of course. And he wrote The Adventures of Poor Mrs. Quack. Well, I mean, to read The Adventures of Poor Mrs. Quack, get your Kleenex box handy. It is heartbreaking, as it was intended to be. But this man, he was not Mr. Fuzzy, was he? He was not a sweet-tempered guy. And his gratitude to Thornton Burgess was because Thornton Burgess helped pass that legislation, a children's book. So it's really quite an amazing piece of Thornton Burgess's story. This is what they were up against. You see the woman with the feathered hat. The time that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was trying to get passed through Congress, women's hats, the millinery trade was hugely popular, and birds were being killed all over the place for their plumage, for decorative purposes. The picture on the right is that's the Boston Trade Market, and animals were sold for food or other purposes. But it was a time that gunpowder was changing, automobiles were coming into play, and the ability of hunters to take higher powered guns into the habitat of wild creatures was dramatically increased. And so it was, some ways, it seemed like the cards were stacked against, especially the migrating birds, which Thornton Burgess described really so magnificently. But it was a challenging time for wildlife, especially for the birds. I'll skip over this. Just look at the last in yellow there. Thornton Burgess said he got his material in the field and by constant study. And I think that too is it's important to know this. It's important to know he wasn't making this stuff up. He was writing fictional stories, but because they were based on nature, observation and study, I think helps explain why, there's still available. Who was interested in radio? Sue, is it you? Yeah. So this is absolutely fascinating. At the time Thornton Burgess was in Springfield, radio had come on the scene in the same way the internet came on our scene. And people were electrified by the idea that you could have the voice of someone you'd never seen or never would see, but they were famous, they were important, and their voice was in your house. You could hear them. It was, as I said, it was electrifying to people. And Thornton Burgess and another man named Austin Hobart Clark at the Smithsonian Institute, the two of them said, hey, this is kind of amazing, and we can use radio for science. We can use it to educate people. And so the two of them set up this program. Thornton Burgess offered on his radio program, which was basically reading children's stories. It was the Radio Nature League. And he said to his listeners, well, I'm thinking about starting this Radio Nature League. What do you think? Anyone in my listening audience interested in joining up? And he got 50,000 people within weeks. It was, there was a hunger for this. Just remember the internet. Remember how we were, everyone was just, what is this all about? So Thornton Burgess tapped into radio, and it again spread the word of his conservation values. So you don't need to read through all these, but the first one there is Thornton Burgess. I'm getting so now that when anyone for research, anything is wanted, I just say, go ask for it on the radio. And it just speaks to what he was thinking of. So this is a heath hen. Did any of you know that that's what that is? It's in the grouse family. So this is, this is a story for you. Thornton Burgess realized the power of radio, and he and his Smithsonian buddy wanted to use it to push science. So Thornton Burgess met a Bowdoin College professor, Alfred Gross. And Alfred Gross said, you know, I've got to do this study on ruffed grouse, and I need more specimens to study. And Thornton Burgess said, hey, I will ask my audience, like the quote that I just read you. I'll ask my audience. Well, Alfred Gross, that particular fall during hunting season, got 300 specimens of grouse. He was expecting maybe 50 if he was lucky. He got 300 because Thornton Burgess had put out the call. But it was the beginning of the friendship of the two men. And the reason the heath hen is here, let me see what no, I'm going to go back, is because Alfred Gross invited Thornton Burgess to take part in a study of the heath hen as it was in decline on the vineyard. And that's what my children's book is about. It's for children, it's also for adults. And it describes the efforts of conservationists and Thornton Burgess and Alfred Gross capturing the very last. It was known to be the last bird of its kind on the vineyard, and they captured it and banded it. It's extremely powerful. Thornton Burgess described this in his autobiography. And if you read it, I doubt if any of you could put it aside without having a tear in your eye. It's really heartbreaking because he brings to you in his account, and I wanted to clarify in my account what extinction means. Extinction is forever, as they say. But the heath hen was a piece of Thornton Burgess's life. This is Christie indulging herself. I can't help it. This picture is of experts in Canada, the US, Germany, England, and Scotland. And they're gathered for one purpose, to study the environment. And this is in 1933. Because a Boston businessman wanted to know what the heck was going on with the salmon and why sometimes there were a lot and sometimes there were a few. He wanted an answer. So he paid for all these people to come to Labrador, out in the middle of nowhere, hang out for a week and talk. So it strikes me as rare. I don't know if it strikes you as rare. I thought this is pretty unusual. But Thornton Burgess is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's the sixth one on the left there, the kind of tallish guy in the back. And he went with his friend Alfred Gross. I just think, to me, it speaks to Burgess's passion for the environment, because he was in his glory. He could go to a literary conference and he'd have a good time, but nothing like this. He was absolutely in his glory. So I like to share that. This is the legacy of an educator. So the man there on the far right, that's Bradford Washburn, and you may know him as a mountaineer who climbed Mount McKinley at 11. He was an explorer, an extraordinary individual who took over the Boston Museum of Science as director for 25 years. And he, at the end of his 25 years, a trustee wanted to honor this Bradford Washburn. That's his wife on the other side, the older man there in the middle, Thornton Burgess. And so the Boston Museum of Science said, we are going to establish the Bradford Washburn Award, and we want you to help pick out the recipient. So they gathered all these names together, and Bradford Washburn said, you know, it would mean a lot to me if we could give another award for the 3 people who've influenced me personally the most in my life. And that would be Curtly Mather, my Harvard geology professor, and that would be Gilbert Grosvenor, the founder of National Geographic Society. And that would be a children's author, Thornton Burgess, who showed me who cultivated my love of nature. And the number of people, I don't know if you know Wayne Peterson, who is very renowned with Mass Audubon. He has a section in my biography. Thornton Burgess set him on the path too. So the legacy of an educator, this is part of who Thornton Burgess is, of what his legacy has been, as well as being the storyteller. So here are the two books. And we'll go back to the two books. So honestly, you've been a marvelous audience. Any questions? That's all I have to say. Yes.
He was an only child, correct?
Thornton Burgess. Yes, he
Yes.
was. Yeah. And his mother never remarried. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any recordings of his radio shows?
There are recordings. Very good question. If you've got a real good memory, you can remember the name of Peter Oehlkers, Oehlkers, at Salem State University. And he took a sabbatical and he set up a blog on Thornton Burgess's articles. And on that blog, I do believe he has some recordings of Thornton Burgess, but his name is Peter Oehlkers, Oehlkers. And he's at Salem State, faculty at Salem State.
Okay,
Peter, yeah. I think that would be your best bet, but if you can't find to your satisfaction, get back to me. If you've got one of my bookmarks, you've got my number. Yeah.
He wasn't the illustrator or?
Oh, no. He had, yes, the illustrator, the book there on the right, that's Harrison Cady.
Huh.
If you're an artist, you may be familiar. Those were the illustrations that were used for almost all Thornton Burgess's books, not the very beginning. The first book was by George Kerr, and he had a much harsher looking look to the animals. Harrison Cady signed on, and he's the one who gave them the clothes, and Peter Rabbit has, well, the plump body. So the look of the creatures, that's Harrison Cady, and Thornton Burgess did not. He did not have approval on that. He didn't really participate, didn't want to participate in that. But good question. Any others? Yeah.
My childhood memories and recollections of the stories always associated the characters with Sandwich, as I started to say, that little area of Sandwich. What was that connection, or that is there really a connection? I'm not too sure why I had it.
Okay, no, I think I know what you're talking about. You mean on the pond?
Yes.
All right. She's referring to the Thornton Burgess Museum that was located on Sham Pond, and it was the former house of Thornton Burgess's Aunt Arabella. So it's interesting that you would mention this. People associate it with Thornton Burgess, and it was important to him because this was another habitat that he learned about. He spent a lot of time with her. She was a very eccentric person. She apparently could call eels. And I've read more than one account that she could do this. It seems a little unlikely, but who am I to question that? But on her dock in the back of her house on Sham Pond, that particular house right there, he would be watching fish and insects and, all the creatures that would be associated. Grandfather Frog was probably based on his observations there. Yeah. So he never lived in the house, but he knew it well. Yeah. Yep.
Can you talk about the Thornton Burgess Society here, how that evolved and how it preserves?
Right. The Thornton Burgess Society was started around 1976 by Nancy Titcomb. If you know Titcomb's bookstore, and if you know Nancy Titcomb, if you're lucky enough, she's very, dynamic person. And she saw, as a bookseller herself, the importance of Thornton Burgess. She knew his books and she loved his legacy. So in 1976, the town of Sandwich was celebrating an anniversary, and she wanted to use that and Thornton Burgess's birthday anniversary date in 1974 to commemorate him. So that's when actually the museum was established by Nancy Titcomb, and the Thornton Burgess Society was formalized at that point. So the museum, Nancy Titcomb, the collections, the artwork, the books coming together like that, that was established there in 1976. And then through the 80s and 90s, the community was very active. Cup plates, do any of you have any of the Thornton Burgess cup plates? They were sold as a fundraiser initially with the characters. And that was an important piece of the Burgess Society. But when I began writing about Thornton Burgess, the Burgess Society was known throughout the state. I think I heard you mention Gil Newton. Gil Newton was associated with the Thornton Burgess Society, Mary Beers, and these two individuals in particular, and Stu Parsons. If you think of teachers that you've had who've really, like Thornton Burgess changed Bradford Washburn's career. He changed his trajectory. And these teachers, Mary Beers, Stu Parsons, Gil Newton, they're influential, and you can maybe think of people who've influenced you as well. So the Thornton Burgess Society was renowned for its nature education programs, and then they acquired the Greenbrier Nature Center, and the programs were established there in the jam kitchen. If you bought the jam there. And there was a merge with the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History. Official, just this year, last year, I'm not too sure. It was a kind of a long time coming. So, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm going to go back to Sandwich. Did you mention where he actually lived in the town? I missed that.
I didn't, well, he was born in my house on School Street, but I can stand on my porch and look to the house of Peter.
Here and Molly.
Someone Sue just met, and they live in the house of a relative of Thornton Burgess, as he and his mother went to that house and lived there for 6 years. But I walked along Main Street in Sandwich between Jarvis Street and Liberty Street, and there were about 5 houses right there that he stayed in, including the Village Inn. You know, they're places that you would know. Yeah. Are you from Sandwich?
I grew up in Sandwich.
Oh, okay.
So I have wonderful childhood memories of going to the house on Champ Pond.
Oh, yes, the museum. Yeah, yeah.
Is it still an active museum?
No, it's not. No, it's not. The town owned it and they leased it to the Thornton Burgess Society. They decided that they had to sell the property. We weren't able to purchase it when I was on the board. So now it was sold privately. Yeah.
Yeah, but it must have been there, right? I remember them.
Yeah.
Story time. And,
Yes, exactly.
So I never learned a lot about it, but it's always been a memory of
Oh.
childhood.
Uh-huh.
And so when I saw it was fantastic. I thought more about him.
Uh-huh.
And just, yeah, I was curious. So he was born in the house that you live in.
Yeah, at 6 School Street. And then he and his mother moved to, various houses. So if you know where the Hoxie House is in Sandwich.
That's for, like,
Yeah, that's on 130. And there's no building there now, but there was the lake house, and it was a guest house. It was right there. And he and his mother lived there for 1 year too. So they really, they bounced around of necessity.
So that was torn down then? Was it
Yeah.
to the left?
The lake house was, yeah.
I remember right across from the school. Right?
Yeah.
Right across, yeah.
And it's interesting because the School Street, where he was born, there was a school on School Street that he went to. And where did I read something about, because I read his journals, and he wrote in his journal every day. In his later years, starting around, I think it was 28. But it seems to me he described when he was at the school, he and another boy having to go down to the pump there by the town hall in Sandwich to get water and bring it back to the class on School Street. So anyway, it's
Who
fun.
has been there then for?
Yeah, yeah. So any other questions? This is